My name is Jill Bearup, this is History of Fanfiction Part 4, and fan culture was shaping itself in various interesting ways over the course of the 20th century, and then the internet. In Part 3, we talked about fanzines and how important they were for the dissemination of fanfic before the internet. And fanzines were already beginning to decline in popularity, but the advent of the World Wide Web and the ability to share your stories with anyone, anywhere in the world instantly definitely sped the process. There are still zines out there, and some are pretty popular, but the landscape is different now because nobody needs a zine to read a fanfic. You can just go type stuff into Google and there is everything at your fingertips. You don't need anything printed out. Now, back in the 90s when fewer people had internet, and those who did were hardcore nerds, fanfic was generally shared via Usenet groups or email listservs or other things that people under 35 don't have any idea about. That includes me, I had to go look them up. In the 90s, if you wanted to make your fanfic available to everyone, you had to host it on your own website. Angelfire? Anyone? I remember Angelfire. And while there were some multi-fandom sites available, this approach didn't really start to change until the advent of fanfiction.net in 1998. I joined fanfiction.net on January the 1st in the year of our Lord 2000. I'd got into fanfiction by searching something about Harry Potter and ending up on an author's personal website, where I devoured many interesting fics about Hermione, which I thought were the best thing ever, because Hermione was the main character. She was doing stuff and it was cool. This ability to keep all the fanfic from all the genres and all the fandoms together in one place, really big deal. First, because the writers could expect a wider and larger audience for their work, and when you're basically getting paid in compliments, that's a big deal. And second, because the readers could start in one fandom and then maybe branch out into others. You came for Harry Potter, but you read all the fics you fancied, and so how about Pokemon? You like Pokemon? Or maybe Star Wars? Yes, I have used that pun before, and no, I refuse to apologise. So picture the scene. It's been 16 years since the last Star Wars movie, and people are naturally quite excited. A prequel! It's gonna have young Obi-Wan, the origins of Darth Vader, it's gonna be amazing! And it might have been, or not, depending on your personal opinion of the Star Wars prequels, but one thing about them is for certain. The Phantom Menace, in particular, brought out slashers like never before. There was a fanfic archive for Obi-Wan Qui-Gon / 2 days after the North American release of The Phantom Menace. Because this wasn't the 70s and this wasn't the 80s, even if fanfic was still a tiny niche activity, the fans who wrote and read it were connected like never before. Not just that, but moving to 2004 and the development of Delicious, you could tag stuff. And this was a revelation because it was like a search engine in reverse. You wanted someone to be able to find your rare pair or your work from a really obscure fandom, tag that shiz and you're good to go. And as the years went on and internet access became more and more widespread, more and more sites became homes for fic. You had your fanfiction.net and your Livejournal communities, you had Delicious, later you had Archive of Our Own, which skews older and more slashy, you had WattPad, also later, which skews younger and more RPF, and you have Tumblr, which is a terrible place to read fanfic in my opinion, but in which you can really build a community of fan writers and readers. What I'm saying is, regardless of your niche, you have a lot of options nowadays. But back in the day, that wasn't always the case, especially if your material was, shall we say, not safe for work. Remember, where you find art, you will find explicit art, and so where you find fanfic, you will find explicit fanfic. And when the mainstream media talks about fanfic, it's the explicit stuff they jump to first. Now, you might think that's because 50 Shades of Grey is the thing that really brought fanfic into the mainstream, and that is partially true. But I seem to recall a particularly breathless Sunday Times article in which the author wrote Frodo Sam /fic, which came out around the same time as the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films. What can I say? Sex sells. But the hosting of it has always been controversial. Prior to 2002, fanfiction.net allowed NC-17 stories, and they had a box which you could tick to say if you were over 17, so that they wouldn't show you explicit stuff if you were underage. But in 2002, they changed their policy and purged a number of different things, but these included 1. NC-17 rated stories, all of them, and 2. all RPF on the site. That's real person fic. And in 2012 they had another purge of fics which had sprung up in the meantime, which they felt to be in contravention of their rules. Of course, they didn't actually give anyone any notice of this, so people came onto the site to find that their stories had been deleted without any warning at all. Gosh, high-handed removal of stuff without warning. I've never been on any other sites like that. A similar thing to the fanfiction.net purges happened on Livejournal in 2007. Well, what actually happened is that Livejournal decided that it needed to get rid of child pornography on the site, which is, of course, a noble goal. The way it went about this was to blacklist certain tags, which meant that an awful lot of, say, Harry Potter fic in which 2 teenage characters get it on got deleted. But also, given the nature of tags, they managed to delete an awful lot of child abuse survivor support groups. Good job, LJ. So what to do about all of these explicit fics which now need a home? Well, the fanfiction.net purges did lead to people setting up their own sites for MA and NC-17 rated works, but you have to wait until 2008 to find something that provides a home for absolutely anything. Welcome to Archive of Our Own, or AO3. AO3, which launched in 2008, is a site for fic and fanworks in general, which allows absolutely anything as long as you tag it appropriately. Anything marked mature will warn the reader before they open the story, and so far this seems to work reasonably well. AO3 is also unique among fanfiction sites in that it doesn't run on ad revenue, it asks for donations from its members. Because while there are a large number of broke teenagers writing fanfic, there's also a large contingent of older people who would quite like to have a site where they can put their fic and not have it deleted the next day without any warning. AO3 has a policy on DMCA takedowns. Like, they have rules. And while fanfiction.net, for example, doesn't host any works based on Anne Rice books, for example, on AO3, anything goes. Anything. Which means there's a lot of really squicky stuff on there. And also some of the best fiction you will ever read, original or no. That's not to say AO3 good, fanfiction.net bad, or to say that the absolutely anything goes approach to fanfic is universally loved, but this is the decision that the people behind AO3 made, and here we are. The Organisation for Transformative Works, which is the non-profit body behind AO3, takes a more forthright approach to the defence of fanfic and fanworks than pretty much any other fanfic site. But it's a stance which is much more consistent with the opinions of fan writers and the way those opinions have been going over the last couple of decades. Fanfiction, as we have previously discussed, used to be a niche hobby, and not just that, but one that was kind of secret. It started as something done by a small number of people, which they shared with a relatively small number of people, and when copyright became more of an issue, fan writers became even more careful, because really, who wants to get sued? Depending on the kind of fanfic that you wrote, you could have got fired, you could have got into serious trouble. But the internet changed the landscape. Because nowadays, sure, it's technically possible to sue a fan writer or to force them to take their fic down, but how useful is that really? I mean, first of all, the internet is forever, and second, corporations and authors are increasingly realizing that there's no point. In fact, it might even be counterproductive. A lot of modern writers used to write fanfiction. Some of them still do write fanfiction. And even those that don't understand how powerful it can be as a marketing tool. People love your world enough to write stuff about it for free. That's quite an endorsement. And while to avoid any possible legal issues, it's best for writers not to read fanfic about their own creations, and again, we'll get to that, encouraging it, or at least being neutral towards it, is increasingly acceptable. But the thing is, even actively discouraging it isn't gonna do much. Fanfic is now visible enough in the mainstream that bringing in the lawyers is going to alienate a lot of your readers. Not just the ones that write fic. And so next time, among other things, we need to talk about the phenomenon which did so much to bring fic to the mainstream and sparked so many conversations about legality and ethics and fanworks. Yep, hold on to your hats. We're going to be discussing 50 Shades of Grey. Or more accurately, 50 Shades of Legality. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/JillBearup, or you can donate via PayPal, or if neither of those tickle your fancy, you can always subscribe or follow me on Twitter @JillBearup. Regardless, I'll see you next time.